The alarm shrieked through the barracks at 4 in the morning, 2 hours before dawn. Jake rolled out of his narrow bunk and grabbed his training gear, while his body still remembered the dreams of home. Around him, other cadets stumbled through, the same routine they had practiced for 3 weeks now. The megalons moved slowly but steadily, their massive forms making the floor shake with each step. The Vorthans were already dressed and stretching their long limbs, ready to race through whatever Commander Zexthul had planned. Jake pulled on his boots and looked across the room at Lisa. She was lacing her own boots with quick, precise movements. That reminded him she had been doing this kind of training long before coming to the academy. Her face was calm, but he could see the tension in her shoulders. The last few weeks had been harder on the humans than anyone wanted to admit. The training bay was lit by harsh white lights that cast sharp shadows across the obstacle courses and combat rings. Commander Zexthul stood in the center of the space, his scales looking almost black under the bright illumination. His yellow eyes tracked each cadet as they assembled in formation. "Today we test your climbing abilities," he announced. "Real soldiers must be able to scale walls, cliffs, and enemy fortifications without mechanical assistance. This exercise will separate the natural warriors from those who depend on tools and technology." Jake looked at the wall Zexthul indicated, and his heart sank. The surface rose 40 feet straight up, with only small handholds carved into the metal. The holds were spaced for creatures with long arms and natural claws. What looked challenging for a Vorthan or Megalon looked nearly impossible for human hands and arms. "Megalons first," Zexthul ordered. "Show these soft species how real climbing is done." The 4 Megalons approached the wall with confidence. Their thick fingers wrapped around the handholds easily, and their powerful arms pulled their massive bodies upward without apparent effort. Their gray skin was tough enough that scraping against the rough metal did not bother them. One by one, they reached the top and rappelled down using the ropes provided. The Vorthans went next. Their claws gave them perfect grip on the handholds, and their lean bodies moved up the wall like giant lizards climbing a tree. They made it look effortless, racing each other to the top while their long tails helped them balance. "Crystalline cadets," Zexthul called. The diamond-like beings approached the wall differently. They could not grip the handholds the same way, but their incredibly hard bodies could create new holds by pressing against the metal until it bent slightly under the pressure. They moved more slowly, but with absolute certainty that they would not fall. "Humans," Zexthul said, and Jake heard something like amusement in his voice. "Let us see how the newest Federation members handle a simple climbing exercise." Jake stepped forward with Lisa and the other human cadets. The wall looked even taller up close, and the handholds seemed designed for hands twice the size of his own. He reached up and wrapped his fingers around the first hold, feeling the metal bite into his skin. The first few moves were manageable. Jake had climbed trees and barn walls back home, and his farm-strengthened arms could handle his body weight. But as he moved higher, the holds became smaller and further apart. His fingers started to ache from gripping the metal, and his arms began to burn with effort. Below him, he heard one of the other human cadets fall with a grunt of pain. The safety harness caught him, but Jake could hear the embarrassment in his heavy breathing. Jake made it halfway up the wall before his fingers gave out. He hung for a moment, trying to find a better grip, then felt his hands slip. The harness jerked tight around his chest as he swung against the metal surface. "Pathetic," Zexthul said as Jake rappelled down. "Absolutely pathetic." Lisa tried next and made it 3/4 of the way up before her smaller hands could no longer hold her weight. She fell with a curse that would have made her boxing coach proud. One by one, the human cadets attempted the wall. One by one, they failed to reach the top. By the end of the exercise, they were bruised, scraped, and humiliated, while the other species watched with expressions ranging from pity to contempt. "Form up," Zexthul commanded. The cadets assembled in ranks facing their instructor. Jake could feel sweat and blood from his torn hands, but he kept his face neutral. Beside him, Lisa stood straight despite the scrapes on her arms and legs. "What you have witnessed today," Zexthul began, his voice carrying across the training bay, "is a perfect demonstration of why some species are natural warriors and others are not." He began to pace back and forth in front of the formation, his claws clicking on the metal floor. "The Megalons have strength built into their very bones. The Vorthans have claws and speed gifted by evolution. The crystalline beings have armor that makes them nearly indestructible. These are the gifts of true warrior races." Jake felt his jaw clench as Zexthul's yellow eyes fixed on the human section of the formation. "And then we have humans," the commander continued. "Soft skin that tears on rough surfaces, small hands that cannot grip properly, weak muscles that fail under real stress. I have seen house pets with better natural weapons than these creatures." Few of the alien cadets made sounds that might have been laughter. Jake felt heat rise in his chest but forced himself to remain at attention. "The humans are here because the Federation Council decided that numbers matter more than quality," Zexthul said, his voice growing louder. "Because politicians believe that every species deserves a chance to play soldier, regardless of their obvious limitations." The commander stopped directly in front of Jake, towering over him with scales that seemed to shimmer in the harsh light. "Look at this one," Zexthul said, gesturing with a clawed hand. "This is supposed to be a warrior, this soft, weak creature from a soft, weak world. His species has been in space for less than a century. They have never faced real combat against a determined enemy. They think that having crude projectile weapons makes them dangerous." Jake stared straight ahead, but his hands were curling into fists at his sides. "The humans lack the killer instinct of true warriors," Zexthul continued, moving closer until Jake could smell his reptilian breath. "They hesitate when they should strike. They negotiate when they should destroy. They are the weakest species ever admitted to this academy, and I question whether Earth's admission was anything more than a galactic charity case designed to make the Federation look inclusive." The words hit Jake like physical blows. Every frustration. From the past 3 weeks, every whispered insult from alien cadets, every impossible exercise designed for creatures with natural advantages that humans did not possess, came rushing to the surface. Their planet is so safe and comfortable that they never learned what real violence looks like, Zexthul said, his voice dripping with contempt. They evolved from creatures that ate plants and ran away from anything dangerous. They are prey, animals pretending to be predators, and everyone in this room knows it except them. Jake felt something snap inside his chest, like a wire pulled too tight. The farm boy who had thrown hay bales and wrestled steers, who had grown up working 18-hour days under the burning Texas sun, who had earned his place here through scores of tests and trials, finally reached his limit. They simply do not have what it takes to be real soldiers because they are fundamentally weak creatures from a fundamentally weak world, and no amount of training will change that basic biological reality, Zexthul continued. The commander never finished his sentence. Jake's right fist came up from somewhere near his boots and caught Zexthul's jaw with a sound like a gunshot echoing through the training bay. The 8-foot reptilian instructor lifted off the ground and crashed backward into a stack of training equipment. The entire room went dead silent, except for the ringing of metal and Zexthul's groans of pain as he lay motionless on the floor with his jaw hanging at an impossible angle. The medical bay of the Nexus Military Academy had seen many training injuries over the centuries, but nothing quite like what they found when Vextar was brought in screaming. The Zenthari medical staff worked frantically to assess his condition, while human doctors watched with growing concern about the implications of what Jake Collins had done. Dr. Yethka was the head of medical services and had treated injuries from dozens of different species during her long career. She prided herself on remaining calm during medical emergencies, but the extent of Vextar's damage shook her professional composure. The Zenthari's shoulder had been not just dislocated but partially crushed with surgical precision. The damage went far deeper than what was visible on the surface. Multiple tendons had been severed completely while others were stretched beyond their ability to heal properly. Hairline fractures ran through the bone structure in patterns that suggested incredible force applied with perfect knowledge of Zenthari anatomy. Most disturbing of all, the injury had been inflicted in a way that would cause maximum long-term disability while avoiding immediate life-threatening damage. Dr. Yethka had seen combat injuries before, but this was different. Battlefield wounds were usually messy and chaotic, reflecting the random violence of warfare. Vextar's injury looked like it had been performed by someone with detailed medical knowledge of exactly how to cripple a Zenthari warrior permanently without killing him. The medical team worked for hours trying to repair what they could, but their prognosis was grim. Vextar would live and he would retain basic use of his arm, but he would never again possess the speed and precision that defined Zenthari military prowess. His career as a warrior was effectively over before it had properly begun. Word of the incident spread through the Academy faster than official reports could be filed. Every species had their own interpretation of what had happened and what it meant for the future of interspecies cooperation. The Zenthari were horrified that one of their finest young warriors had been permanently crippled by a primitive deathworlder. Other species were quietly wondering what humans were really capable of when pushed beyond their limits. The formal investigation began immediately under the direction of Academy Commandant Vortek, an ancient Zenthari whose military career spanned 3 centuries. He had overseen thousands of disciplinary cases during his time, but never one with such serious implications for galactic military cooperation. The stakes were too high for anything less than a complete examination of the facts. The surveillance. Footage from the classroom was reviewed frame by experts in combat analysis and xenobiology. What they saw challenged everything the galactic community thought they knew about human physical capabilities and psychological responses. The recording showed Jake moving with reaction speed that their instruments could barely measure accurately. More disturbing than the speed was the precision. Jake's response had not been a moment of uncontrolled rage, but a calculated application of force designed to achieve specific results. His grip strength had been measured indirectly by analyzing the bone fractures, and the numbers were staggering. Few species in the galaxy could generate that kind of crushing power, and none could apply it with such surgical accuracy. The xenobiology expert called in to analyze the footage was Dr. Keth Era, the same Altarian who had welcomed the human recruits on their first day. Her reputation for objectivity and scientific accuracy was known throughout the Academy, and her findings would carry enormous weight with the review board. Dr. Keth Ara spent days reviewing not just the incident footage, but every piece of data, The Academy had collected about human performance since their admission to galactic society. The picture that emerged was both fascinating and terrifying for those who understood its implications. The galactic databases had classified humans based on early contact reports that focused on their technological development and social structures. The assumption had been that any species from a death world would be tough survivors, but not necessarily superior warriors. Earth's gravity and dangerous wildlife were noted, but their significance had been underestimated by beings who had never experienced such conditions. Dr. Cathara's analysis revealed that the galactic community had made a fundamental error in understanding human evolution. Earth had not just produced a species tough enough to survive on a death world. It had produced a species that became the absolute apex predator of that world through millions of years of evolutionary pressure. Every aspect of human physiology reflected this heritage. Their reaction times were optimized for dealing with multiple, fast-moving threats. Their grip strength was designed for grappling with large, dangerous animals. Their ability to track and predict movement patterns had been honed by hunting creatures that were faster and stronger than any individual human. Most importantly, humans had evolved psychological triggers that allowed them to access these capabilities when their survival or the survival of their pack members was threatened. The mild-mannered species that had joined the galactic community were the same beings who had hunted mammoths with spears and fought off cave bears with nothing but stone tools. The review board listened to Dr. Cathara's presentation in stunned silence. The implications went far beyond a single incident at a military academy. If her analysis was correct, then humanity's entry into galactic society represented the introduction of a predator species that had been deliberately concealing its true nature. Further investigation revealed that this concealment had been intentional. Earth's diplomatic corps had carefully managed first contact to present humanity as a friendly species seeking cooperation rather than conquest. They had downplayed human military capabilities and emphasized their desire for peaceful integration with galactic civilization. The strategy had worked perfectly. Other species saw humans as useful but harmless allies who could be relied upon for technical innovation and colonial development. The possibility that they were inviting apex predators into their homes had never occurred to most galactic leaders. Jake's disciplinary hearing took place in the Academy's main conference room, with representatives from all major species present. The formal charges against him included assault, excessive use of force, and conduct unbecoming a military recruit. Each charge carried the potential for immediate expulsion and permanent ban from galactic military service. Amy testified on Jake's behalf, providing a detailed account of Vextar's increasingly aggressive behavior over the previous weeks. She presented evidence that the Zenthari recruit had been deliberately provoking confrontations and undermining human performance through harassment and intimidation. Her testimony was calm, factual, and devastatingly effective. Lisa Brooks supported Amy's account and added her own observations about the hostile environment that had developed toward human recruits. She pointed out that Jake had shown remarkable restraint during previous confrontations and had only acted when Amy was physically assaulted. The most surprising testimony came from Rixal, the young Zenthari who had served on Jake's team during the failed simulation. He spoke about his own observations of human capabilities during training exercises and his growing respect for their tactical thinking and adaptability. He suggested that Vextar's hostility had been motivated more by fear of human competence than by any legitimate concerns about their qualifications. Commander Theklos testified about the tactical simulation and confirmed that team failure had been entirely due to poor leadership rather than any deficiency in human performance. He noted that Jake had consistently demonstrated superior judgment and restraint in previous training scenarios. The most damaging testimony for Vextar's position came from the medical analysis of Amy's injuries. The claw marks on her arm showed clear evidence of deliberate assault with intent to cause pain and establish physical dominance. Under galactic military law, such an attack on a non-combatant student was grounds for immediate expulsion, regardless of species or family connections. Dr. Cathara's expert testimony about human evolutionary psychology provided context that changed how the entire incident was viewed. She explained that Jake's response had been triggered by protective instincts that were hardwired into human DNA by millions of years of evolution. From a biological perspective, his reaction had been not just predictable, but inevitable. The review board deliberated for 2 days before announcing their decision. Jake would receive a formal reprimand for excessive force, but would remain enrolled in the academy. The board noted that while his response had been extreme, it had also been provoked by a clear assault on his mate, which activated instinctive protective responses beyond his conscious control. Vextar was expelled immediately for assault and conduct prejudicial to interspecies cooperation. His family's political connections could not overcome the clear evidence of his unprovoked attack on a non-combatant student. The decision sent shockwaves through the Zenthari military hierarchy and forced them to reconsider their assumptions about human capabilities and psychology. The incident at the Academy triggered classified reviews of human integration throughout galactic military and diplomatic services. Every 3 weeks had passed since the confrontation between Jake Collins and Vextar, and the tension in the Academy had grown thick enough to cut with a blade. Every interaction between humans and Zenthari carried an undercurrent of hostility that made other species nervous. Even the instructors had begun to notice the strain affecting training exercises and group dynamics. The breaking point came during what should have been a routine tactical simulation. The exercise was designed to test mixed species teams under pressure using a complex scenario that required both individual skill and group coordination. Each team had to infiltrate a heavily defended facility, retrieve critical intelligence, and escape without being detected or losing any team members. Jake found himself assigned to a team that included Amy, Lisa Brooks, 2 Altarians, and unfortunately Vextar. The team composition had clearly been arranged by the instructors to force cooperation between the antagonistic species. Jake suspected that Commander Theklos was testing whether the growing tensions would affect mission performance. The simulation took place in a massive training facility that could recreate almost any environment. For this exercise, the Academy had programmed a recreation of a hostile military base complete with automated defenses, patrol schedules, and environmental hazards. The defending team was made up of advanced training robots programmed with tactical intelligence. From the beginning of the exercise, it was clear that Vextar had no intention of cooperating with the human team members. He positioned himself as the natural leader and began issuing orders without consulting anyone else. His plan relied heavily on speed and direct action, which played to Zenthari's strengths but ignored the capabilities of other species. Jake tried to suggest modifications to the plan that would better utilize Amy's technical skills and the Altarian's pattern recognition abilities. Vextar dismissed these suggestions as unnecessary complications and insisted that his approach was the proven method used by successful Zenthari military units for centuries. The first phase of the mission went badly. Vextar's direct approach triggered several automated defense systems that could have been avoided with better planning. The team was forced to fight their way through obstacles that should have been bypassed entirely. One of the Altarians was eliminated from the simulation when patrol patterns that Jake had tried to warn about caught the team in the open. By the halfway point of the exercise, it was obvious that Vexatar's leadership was failing. The team was behind schedule, had lost a member, and was running low on the equipment needed to complete their objectives. The other teams in the simulation were performing much better, using more collaborative approaches. Amy stepped forward and quietly suggested an alternative route to their target that would avoid the remaining automated defenses. She had been studying the facility layout and identified a maintenance tunnel system that was not well guarded. Lisa supported Amy's plan and pointed out that it would give them a better chance of completing the mission successfully. Vexatar's response was explosive. He accused the humans of undermining his authority and suggested that their constant questions and alternative suggestions proved they were not suited for military operations. Real warriors followed orders from their superiors without debate or hesitation. The argument continued even as the simulation clock continued running. Jake tried to mediate by pointing out that all team members had valuable input and that flexible tactics were more effective than rigid adherence to plans that were not working. His calm reasoning seemed to make Vextar even more frustrated. The exercise ended in complete failure for their team. They had not reached their objective, had lost half their members to defensive systems, and had triggered alarms that would have made escape impossible. The other mixed species teams had all performed better by using collaborative leadership and taking advantage of each member's unique abilities. During the post-exercise debriefing, Commander Theklos was clearly disappointed with the performance. He pointed out that the failed team had more combined talent and capability than any of the others, but had wasted those advantages through poor leadership and internal conflict. His criticism was directed at the entire team, but everyone knew who bore primary responsibility. The debriefing continued in a smaller classroom, where each team member had to explain their perspective on what had gone wrong. The Altarians spoke carefully about the importance of utilizing all available resources in military operations. Lisa was more direct in stating that successful missions required leaders who listened to input from their team members. When Amy's turn came, she presented a detailed analysis of why the failed approach had been predictable based on the defensive patterns she had observed. Her technical breakdown of the exercise highlighted exactly where different tactics might have succeeded. Her presentation was logical, thorough, and devastatingly accurate. Vextar sat silently through most of the debriefing, but Jake could see his anger building with each comment that implicitly criticized his leadership. The Xanthari's scales had shifted to the dark color that indicated high stress or fury. His claws were extended slightly, and his breathing had become more rapid. After the formal debriefing ended, the team members began filing out of the classroom. Jake was gathering his equipment when he heard raised voices behind him. He turned to see Vextar confronting Amy near the door of the room. Vextar was accusing Amy of deliberately undermining his authority during the exercise. He claimed that her constant suggestions and technical analysis had been calculated to make him look incompetent in front of the instructors. He suggested that humans were naturally sneaky and manipulative rather than honorable warriors. Amy responded calmly that she had only been trying to help the team succeed. Her suggestions had been based on objective analysis of the tactical situation, not on any desire to undermine anyone's authority. She pointed out that successful military operations required using all available information and capabilities. The confrontation might have ended there, but Vextar was beyond rational discussion. Weeks of wounded pride and growing resentment had built up to a breaking point. He was facing the possibility that his perfect military record would be stained by a failed exercise that could have been prevented by listening to advice from beings he considered inferior. In his anger and humiliation, Vexatar made a decision that would change everything. He reached out and grabbed Amy's arm roughly, his claws digging into her skin as he yanked her toward him. His intention was probably just to force her to face him while he continued his verbal assault, but the physical contact crossed a line that could not be uncrossed. Amy cried out in surprise and pain as Vextar's claws drew blood from her arm. The sound cut through Jake like a physical blow, and something primitive awakened in his mind. Every human carries genetic memories of millions of years of evolution on a world where everything tried to kill them. More importantly, they carry the instincts that made them the apex predators of that dangerous world. What happened next occurred faster than most witnesses could follow. Jake moved with speed and precision that seemed impossible for someone from a species the galactic databases classified as only moderately capable. His hand closed around Vextar's wrist with crushing force and twisted in a motion that was both calculated and devastating. The sound of breaking bone echoed through the classroom, followed immediately by Vextar's scream of agony. The Zenthari warrior found himself on the ground with his shoulder dislocated and his arm bent at an angle that made several witnesses look away in horror. Jake had not raised his voice or shown any obvious signs of rage. His movements had been controlled and precise, designed to cause maximum damage while neutralizing the threat as quickly as possible. The cold calculation in his actions was somehow more frightening than mindless violence would have been. The classroom fell completely silent, except for Vextar's moans of pain. Amy was examining her injured arm, but seemed more concerned about Jake than her own wounds. The other team members stood frozen in shock at the sudden explosion of violence. Commander Theklos had heard the commotion and arrived to find his classroom containing one injured Zenthari recruit and one very calm human standing over him. The contrast between Jake's composed demeanor and Vextar's obvious agony created a scene that would be remembered by everyone present. Medical personnel were summoned immediately, and Vextar was rushed to the Academy hospital. Jake remained in the classroom answering questions from Academy security officers who were trying to understand exactly what had happened and why. The incident report would show that surveillance cameras had captured the entire confrontation, including Vextar's assault on Amy and Jake's response. But the implications of what the cameras had recorded would not become clear until the footage was analyzed by experts who understood the true capabilities that humans had been hiding from the galaxy. 2 months had passed since Jake Collins first walked into the Nexus Military Academy, and everything had changed in ways he never expected. The basic training program was intense and demanding, but Jake found himself adapting faster than most of his fellow recruits. What surprised him more was how the social structure among the different species had developed into something that felt familiar yet uncomfortable. The Zenthari had quickly established themselves as the natural leaders among the recruits. Their superior speed and agility gave them advantages in most physical competitions. They moved through combat courses like flowing water, while other species struggled to keep up. Their confidence grew with each success, and they began to act as if their dominance was simply the natural order of things. At the center of the Zenthari group was Vextar, a young male whose family held high rank in the galactic military hierarchy. His scales were a deeper gold than most others, and he carried himself with the pride of someone born to command. Vexatar had never failed a training exercise, and his tactical scores were among the highest in their class. Jake watched Vexatar during morning combat drills and had to admit the Zenthari was impressive. His movements were precise and efficient. He could strike 3 targets in the time it took most recruits to aim at one. When Vextar led training exercises, his team usually won by margins that made the competition look easy. But Jake had started to notice something that made him uncomfortable. Vextar and his closest followers had begun making comments about the other species that went beyond friendly competition. They spoke about the natural superiority of warrior races and suggested that some species were not meant for military service. The comments about humans were the worst. Jake heard himself and his fellow humans called Deathworlder primitives who had somehow tricked their way into the academy. Vextar claimed that humans were using some kind of illegal enhancement technology because their performance scores did not match what the Zenthari databases said about human capabilities. The truth was that Jake had been performing better than anyone expected, including himself. His reaction times during combat simulations were consistently faster than the Academy record suggested was possible for humans. His endurance seemed unlimited compared to most other species. When tactical problems were presented, Jake found solutions that impressed even the instructors. Amy had noticed similar patterns in her engineering classes. Human brains seemed to process certain types of problems differently than other species expected. Amy could visualize complex mechanical systems in ways that amazed her Altarian classmates. Her solutions to design challenges were creative and effective even when they broke conventional rules. The tension between species had been building slowly, but Jake felt it getting worse each day. During hand-to-hand combat training Vextar made sure to point out every mistake made by human recruits while ignoring similar errors from his own species. He questioned whether humans should be allowed to continue in combat roles when they clearly belonged in support positions. The breaking point came during a group tactical exercise that mixed teams from different species. Jake found himself leading a squad that included 2 Altarians, 1 Kepler engineer, and surprisingly, 1 young Zenthari named Rixol, who seemed less arrogant than most of his species. The exercise involved capturing a defended position using strategy rather than brute force. Most teams relied on the superior speed and agility of their Zenthari members to overwhelm the defenses. Jake looked at the problem differently and developed a plan that used each species member according to their natural strengths. The Altarians were given tasks that required their superior coordination and pattern recognition. The Kepler engineer was assigned to disable defensive systems using his technical knowledge and multiple limbs. The Zenthari team member was positioned where his speed would be most effective, but not as the only solution. Jake's team completed the exercise in record time while suffering no casualties. The other teams had relied too heavily on direct assault, and several had failed completely when their Zenthari members were eliminated early in the simulation. After the exercise ended, Jake was approached by the lead instructor, a veteran Zenthari officer named Commander Theklos. The commander praised Jake's tactical thinking and asked detailed questions about his approach to the problem. Jake explained his reasoning while trying to remain modest about the success. Vextar had been watching the conversation from across the training area, and his expression was not pleasant. When Commander Theklos moved on to debrief other teams, Vextar walked over to confront Jake directly. He accused Jake of showing off and suggested that using unconventional tactics was a Sign of inferior military thinking. Real warriors won through superior skill and courage, not through clever tricks. Vextar claimed that Jake's success was probably due to some kind of cheating or enhancement that would eventually be discovered. Jake kept his temper under control and responded calmly. He pointed out that the exercise was designed to test tactical thinking, not individual combat skills. Using each team member effectively was the whole point of mixed species cooperation. He suggested that maybe Vextar was upset because his own team had failed the exercise completely. The confrontation might have ended there, but Amy arrived to meet Jake after her own classes. She had heard the raised voices and came over to see what was happening. Her presence seemed to make Vextar even angrier for reasons Jake did not immediately understand. Vextar looked at Amy with obvious disdain and made a comment that made Jake's blood run cold. He suggested that human females were probably only capable of basic support roles and should not be involved in military discussions. Amy was not even a combat student, so she had no business offering opinions about tactical matters. Amy's face went red, but she kept her voice level as she responded. She pointed out that the Academy had accepted her into the advanced engineering program based on her qualifications, not her species or gender. Her test scores and project designs spoke for themselves. She also mentioned that the tactical exercise results were posted publicly so anyone could verify Jake's success. Vextar was clearly embarrassed by being corrected by someone he considered inferior in every way. His scales shifted to a darker color that Jake had learned indicated anger or stress among Zenthari. Several other recruits had gathered to watch the confrontation, and Vextar seemed to realize he was losing face in front of an audience. He made one final comment that was clearly intended to provoke a reaction. He suggested that maybe human females were good for something after all, since they seemed skilled at defending their males when real warriors challenged them. The insult was delivered with a smile that showed sharp teeth. Jake felt something cold settle in his chest as he looked at Vextar. Amy put a calming hand on his arm and suggested they just walk away. The confrontation was not worth escalating over ignorant comments from someone who was obviously threatened by human capabilities. But Jake could see in Vextar's eyes that walking away would be interpreted as weakness or fear. The Zenthari was testing him in front of an audience that included members of all the major species. How Jake responded now would affect how he was treated for the rest of his time at the Academy. Jake smiled politely and thanked Vextar for his opinions about human capabilities. He suggested that maybe they could settle their differences through official channels if Vextar had formal complaints about human performance or Academy admission standards. Otherwise, perhaps it was best if they simply focused on their own training rather than worrying about other species. The response clearly frustrated Vextar, who had been expecting either aggression or submission from Jake. Being dismissed politely in front of an audience was somehow worse than either alternative. His pride was wounded, and his resentment toward humans had grown even deeper. As Jake and Amy walked away from the confrontation, Jake could feel eyes watching them. Word of the exchange would spread quickly through the recruit population. Some would respect how Jake had handled the situation, while others would see it as proof that humans were not suited for military service. Amy squeezed Jake's hand as they walked back toward the dormitories. She told him she was proud of how he had controlled himself during the confrontation, but Jake could not shake the feeling that something dangerous had been set in motion. Vextar's pride had been damaged, and proud warriors rarely forgot such injuries. Jake Collins stepped off the transport ship and looked up at the massive structure floating in space. The Nexus Military Academy stretched out before him like a small metal city. Lights blinked along its hull and ships moved in and out of docking, bays like busy insects. He had dreamed of this moment for years, but seeing it with his own eyes made his chest tight with excitement. Amy Carter squeezed his hand as they walked down the boarding ramp. Her red hair caught the artificial lights of the docking bay, and Jake smiled at her. They had both worked so hard to get here. Out of all the humans who applied to the academy, only 3 had been accepted this year. Jake was going into combat, training, and Amy was heading to the engineering program. The docking bay was filled with creatures Jake had only seen in videos before. Tall beings with skin that looked like blue crystal walked past them, speaking in musical tones. These were the Altarians, and they moved with grace that made Jake feel clumsy. Near the far wall, a group of beings with 4 arms each were checking equipment. The Kepler engineers were known across the galaxy for building the best ships and weapons, but most of the new recruits Jake could see were Xanthari. They stood taller than humans with lean bodies covered in fine scales that shifted from green to gold depending on the light. Their eyes were large and completely black. Sharp claws tipped their fingers, and their movements were quick and smooth, like cats. The Xanthari had been the dominant military force in the galaxy for over 1,000 years. A group of Xanthari recruits walked past Jake and Amy. One of them looked at the humans and made a sound that might have been laughter. Jake heard the word Deathworlder whispered among them. He had heard that word many times since Earth joined the galactic community 5 years ago. Amy noticed his expression and leaned closer to him. She spoke quietly, so only he could hear her words. The Academy database says Earth is classified as a Class 9 death world because of the gravity and dangerous wildlife. Most species think that makes us primitive or lucky to survive at all. Jake nodded but kept his face calm. He had read the same reports. According to galactic standards, Earth was one of the most dangerous planets any intelligent species had ever evolved on. The gravity was higher than most worlds. The weather could kill without warning. Animals on Earth were more aggressive than on safer planets. But Jake had grown up there, and it just felt like home to him. An announcement echoed through the docking bay in several different languages. New recruits were told to report to processing stations based on their species. Jake and Amy found the small station marked for humans. Only one other person was there waiting. The third human was a woman named Lisa Brooks, who looked to be in her early 20s like Jake and Amy. She had short black hair and the kind of muscles that came from years of hard physical training. Lisa introduced herself and explained she was from the Mars colonies. Her specialty was going to be tactical operations. The processing station was run by a middle-aged Altarian female whose crystal skin was a deep purple color. She spoke perfect English and welcomed the humans to the academy. Her name was Dr. Kethara, and she would be one of their instructors in xenobiology and species relations. Dr. Kethara explained that the academy training would last 2 years. The first year focused on basic military skills that all species needed to learn. The second year allowed recruits to specialize in their chosen fields. She handed them each a data pad with their schedules and room assignments. Jake was surprised to learn that he would be sharing living quarters with recruits from other species. His roommates were a Kepler engineer named Zix and a Xanthari warrior named Kaelin. Amy would be living with 2 Altarian females in the engineering dormitories, the SA. Next few hours were spent getting settled and attending orientation meetings. Jake learned that the academy had been built 300 years ago as a joint project between the major species in the Galactic Alliance. Its purpose was to create military officers who could work together despite coming from very different worlds and cultures. During the evening meal in the main dining hall, Jake got his first real look at how the social groups were forming among the new recruits. The Zenthari sat together at several large tables, and their conversation was loud and confident. They talked about battles their families had fought and the honor of continuing military traditions that went back generations. The Altarians gathered in smaller groups and spoke in quiet tones about art and philosophy, along with military tactics. The Kepler engineers seemed more interested in the technical systems that kept the Academy running than in talking about fighting. The three humans sat together at a small table near the wall. Jake noticed that other species looked at them with curiosity, but none approached to introduce themselves. He wondered if they were being avoided on purpose, or if the other recruits were just shy around unfamiliar species. Lisa mentioned that she had overheard some Zenthari recruits questioning why Deathworlders had been accepted into the Academy at all. One had suggested that humans would not be able to keep up with proper military training designed for advanced species. Amy pointed out that the acceptance standards were the same for everyone regardless of species, so they must have qualified on merit. Jake pushed his food around on his plate as he thought about what Lisa had said. He had scored in the top 5% on all the entrance exams, including physical fitness tests. His reaction times and tactical thinking had impressed the human military officers who recommended him, but he was starting to realize that other species might see those achievements differently. After dinner, Jake walked Amy back to her dormitory. The corridors of the academy were wide and well lit with viewing ports that showed the stars outside. They passed groups of recruits heading to study sessions or recreational activities. Most ignored the human couple, but Jake caught a few stares and whispered comments. Outside Amy's dormitory, they said goodnight with a quick kiss. Amy reminded Jake that they were both here because they had earned it through hard work and talent. She told him not to worry about what others thought, and to focus on doing his best in training. Jake made his way back to his own dormitory, thinking about Amy's words. She was right that they belonged here as much as anyone else. But he could not shake the feeling that some of the other recruits saw humans as inferior beings who had gotten lucky. His roommates were already in their shared quarters when Jake arrived. Zix, the Kepler, was working on a small device with 2 of his 4 arms while taking notes with the other 2. Kylin, the Zenthari, was doing exercises that looked like a mix of combat forms and dance movements. Both of them nodded politely to Jake, but neither tried to start a conversation. Jake got ready for sleep and lay in his bunk thinking about the day. Tomorrow would bring the start of actual training, and he would finally get a chance to prove that humans could compete with any species in the galaxy. As he closed his eyes, Jake made a silent promise to himself and to Amy. He would work harder than anyone else if that was what it took. He would show these advanced species that Deathworlders were not primitive survivors, but something much more dangerous. He would make them understand that humans had not just survived on Earth by accident, but had conquered it completely. The Academy's artificial night cycle dimmed the lights, and Jake drifted off to sleep with the sound of alien voices speaking softly in languages he was still learning to understand.